Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel, and today we are going to be doing the first video in our new How to Survive a Grid Collapse series. Originally, I was just going to do this all in one video, but the more I thought about it and the more I planned out the video, I realized that that is a lot of material to cover. So we're going to break it down, and this video is going to be dedicated to having an energy plan that'll help you in a situation like that. Now, a total grid collapse is going to be a lot more severe than just your run-of-the-mill power outage. A total grid collapse is going to be when a large area of the grid or the entire thing has been rendered inoperable, and that grid is unlikely to come back online for a period of several weeks, maybe months. I know a lot of time when you hear grid collapse, you think of a situation kind of like a Mad Max movie where it's just this dystopian, apocalyptic thing that lasts forever. But there have been grid collapses or near grid collapses multiple times within our lifetime. A few years ago, back in 2016, Puerto Rico, parts of that area went 6 months before they had power restored after a hurricane. And then even here recently, earlier this year, Texas was mere minutes away. I think it was something like 4 minutes and 30 seconds away from a total grid collapse. That would have left most of the state, myself included, without power for several months. So it is completely within the realm of possibility to happen. And having a good energy plan is going to do more than just help you stay comfortable. It's going to help you do things like preserve food, preserve your ability to communicate with the outside world, and it can also help you from a security standpoint as well. The first part of your energy plan should be to have something that will allow you to produce the electricity that you need to power your essential devices, whether that's something small like cell phones or even larger items like box freezers that you can use to preserve food for a longer period of time. And there's a couple different ways of going about that, but I think for me and my family, we're going to be relying more on something like this. This is the Ecoflow DELTA. I actually did a review on it, which I will put a card up here and in the description below so you can go check that out. And Ecoflow sent me this about a month ago, and I've been testing it out. And so far, I have been very impressed. I'm probably going to use this more than I'll use my gas generator, and there's a few different reasons for that. The main one being gas generators, even the ones that can run on propane, those are going to be relying on a finite fuel source. Even if you're able to store large quantities of that, eventually you will run out. And if we're in a really long-term grid down or grid collapse situation, it's going to be very hard to store the fuel that you'll need to last you through that entire situation. Whereas with something that can run on solar panels, that's going to allow you to renew your energy time after time after time to keep those essential devices running for pretty much as long as you'll need them to. And when it comes to charging times, the Delta can fully charge in 3.5 to 7 hours using 3 160-watt solar panels or 4 to 8 hours using 4 100-watt panels. When plugged into a wall outlet, it can recharge to 80% capacity in less than an hour and fully charge in 96 minutes. This is one of the fastest recharging times in the world for a device like this, and is thanks to Ecoflow's patented extreme charging technology. It can also be charged in 10 hours using car power ports and includes all the cables that you'll need for each of these charging methods. So in addition to using a renewable power source, another good thing about this Delta is you're not really going to be limited on the types of devices and appliances that you can power using this. I was very surprised that it could handle things like circular saws, my box freezer, and even my washing machine without any problems. And the deep freeze or the box freezer to me is a really, really big deal. My family and I, we have a bunch of meat in the freezer, particularly deer meat, because my dad and I hunt, and last year I got a deer, which was awesome. But I don't want all that deer meat to spoil, and with as much as I have in there, if I am able to preserve that food, that can probably stretch my family's food storage by at least a month. So that means that we're going to be able to eat things like steak, hamburgers and spaghetti for a month without even having to think about dipping into our stores of freeze-dried food. In my family and I, we rely a lot on devices that either have an internal rechargeable battery or also maybe things like power tools or even in-a-loop batteries that can be recharged and reused over and over and over again. So instead of relying purely on alkaline batteries, which are one use and then you throw them away, we're going to be able to recharge those batteries as many times as we need to until they eventually wear out, which that should take a long time. But we're going to be able to have those powered up. We're going to be able to have lights in our house. We're going to be able to charge communication devices like cell phones, batteries for things like two-way walkie-talkies, and we're also going to be able to run other larger devices if we need to, at least for a short period of time. And a power station like this is going to have more advantages to it than just using a renewable energy source. And the first is you can use this inside. Since it doesn't produce any harmful fumes, you don't have to set it out in the yard and run an extension cord into your house or hook it up to a transfer switch. Take it out of its case, turn it on, plug in what you need it to run, and you're good to go. There will be times when you don't want to go outside and mess with getting a gas generator started. Maybe it's bad weather, or maybe there's a security concern. All gas generators, even the quieter inverter types, they still produce noise that will be very easily heard by those in your neighborhood if there is a long-term power outage situation. I don't know if you've been outside during a widespread power outage, but things can get pretty quiet. Even something like an inverter generator is going to be pretty easy for people to hear, and you really don't want to be drawing that sort of attention to yourself during a long-term grid down situation. And also, a power station like this is going to be portable. This weighs less than pretty much any gas generator on the market, so even somebody maybe who's a little bit older or not in the best shape, they are going to be able to lift this up into their car in most cases, along with the panels, and take it with them if they need to get out of Dodge. Now, if you have a traditional portable generator, there's going to be things that you need to keep in mind beyond just having enough fuel stored, and one of those is having the right kind of fuel stored. A lot of generators nowadays, they're dual fuel, meaning they can either run on gasoline or they can run on propane. I have one like that. And if your generator is like that, I strongly recommend storing more propane than gasoline, and the reason's simple. Propane doesn't go bad. If propane does go bad, it's not the fuel. It's the cylinder has degraded to the point where it's unusable. Usually the propane inside is just fine. Maybe it leaked out because of a problem with the cylinder, but if you take care of those tanks, they can last for decades. Gasoline, on the other hand, can usually only last 3 to 6 months. Now, let's say you have a gas generator that can just run on gasoline. If at all possible, purchase ethanol-free gas. That'll store for a longer period of time since it doesn't have ethanol in it. The issue with ethanol is that it can bond with water vapor in the air. So what happens is that water and the ethanol bond, it settles at the bottom of either the gas can, or if the fuel is already in something like a generator, at the bottom of the tank and in the fuel lines, so that when you try to start those devices, the heavier water sunk to the bottom. So really, you're trying to start those devices with water, which isn't going to work out too well. So if you have to store gasoline, get ethanol-free gas and then rotate through it as much as you can. And if you have a standby generator, the big thing to understand about those is many times they are tied into like your home's gas utilities. Many times they run on natural gas, which comes from a nearby utility company. If there is a long-term grid collapse or grid down situation, then eventually other utilities are going to be affected as well, including those natural gas utilities. So if you have a standby generator, I wouldn't really consider that to be a long-term power solution. Really, that's just meant for short-term convenience. If like a limb falls down on a power line near your house, it'll pretty much kick on and you'll barely even know that anything happened. But for a long-term situation, unless you have one that can, I think, run on propane or a diesel one, and you have a lot of that fuel stored on the premises, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to keep a standby generator running long term. The next part of your energy plan should be to determine how are you going to cook during a long-term grid collapse situation. And there's a lot of really good options out there. The first one that I have right here is a butane stove. There's a lot of these that can actually be used to cook indoors, which offers some advantages. You don't have to go outside and mess with a grill when it's raining. And then also from a security standpoint, being able to cook indoors is going to be pretty nice. Then there's also some other indoor cooking methods that I went over in another video, and I will link to that in the description below. Then on the other side of things, you have propane grills that run on these 1-pound propane cylinders. These are great. They last forever. They're really hard to mess up, and you can find them pretty much anywhere. You can even find them in antique stores for very, very cheap. Then some other outdoor cooking methods. Those could include things like gas grills, charcoal grills, and the charcoal grill I think would be really nice kind of during the early stages of a grid collapse where maybe people aren't quite as cranky yet, so you can afford to use something like that that might smell up the place a little bit, and also mean you might even be able to have a hurricane party of sorts if you think things are going to go bad in your freezer, have one last party before things get kind of slim. And then also you can use electric appliances if you have something like a power station or even a gas generator. If you're in a situation where you're relying on a gas generator or a standby generator that's dependent on like natural gas utilities, I would strongly recommend using those electric appliances, things like electric griddles, air fryers, crock pots, for as long as you can, so that when you eventually run out of fuel, then you can start to dip into things like these 1-pound propane bottles, your butane canisters, or if you have large 20-pound tanks of propane or even larger tanks, then you can start using those. And while you're using the gas generator to power those small appliances, don't just use the gas generator for powering that one little thing. Make sure you're using it to power something like maybe your deep freeze or something else in the house so that you're not wasting that precious fuel. And then also, depending on where you live, you might be able to use some wood burning methods of cooking. If you have a wood fireplace or a wood burning stove inside of your home, they're great. You can use them to cook, and they can also help you stay warm if the grid collapse happens during winter or it lasts through the winter. Then as far as outdoor wood burning cooking methods, there are things like rocket stoves, and I think Solo makes something called the bonfire, which produce very little smoke. That, of course, would be valuable during a long-term grid down situation if you don't want people from far off knowing that you are cooking something because of the smoke. But anytime that you do use a fire or anything like that to cook outside, the smell is going to carry. So if you have people in your immediate area, they're still going to be able to tell that. The next part of your energy plan should cover lighting. And the way that I like to go about doing that is I like to have things that use rechargeable batteries, such as these work lamps and also this flashlight here. I like to have stuff that uses regular alkaline batteries, as well as more primitive lighting methods like oil lamps and candles. And the big advantage that devices that use rechargeable batteries is you aren't going to have to purchase as many of those to keep them running long term, as long as you have a way to recharge those batteries over and over again. And that's why I consider that Ecoflow that I showed y'all earlier to be the linchpin of my energy plan. It's going to allow me to keep these devices running basically indefinitely. So as long as I can recharge these drill batteries and as long as I can recharge the battery in this flashlight, I'm going to be able to use them as long as I need to, as often as I need to, because the capacity on that thing is so immense that recharging these batteries isn't really going to do that much to it. And it's definitely not going to do so much to it that I'm not able to replenish that energy with solar power as I go along. And the good thing about having kind of alkaline battery backups is that you will be able to store a lot of those for a relatively low amount of money. And kind of what I like to do, I cheat a little bit. I have AAAs and AA's that are rechargeable themselves, so I'm not really ever having to dip into my last ditch supply of AA and AAA batteries. Then as far as more primitive light sources go, these hurricane lanterns are great because the flame is protected. You can also carry them around. It has a little bell handle here, which is awesome. And then there's also the other oil lamps that you can just keep kind of sitting on a table. And then also, if you have a generator or you have a power station, then you can use things like LED rope lights that you can use to keep larger areas within your home illuminated. And being able to illuminate your area and have things like flashlights and headlamps that you can keep charged up, that's going to help keep you safer. If there's something that you need to go check on at night, then you can flood that entire area with light so you can see what exactly is going on. That's not to say that you don't want to practice good light discipline. If there is a long-term grid collapse or grid down situation, you don't want your house to be the only one on the block lit up like a Christmas tree. So invest in some things like blackout curtains and only use light when necessary so that you're not going to be drawing too much attention to yourself. Your plan for dealing with a grid collapse should also include ways to stay warm during a cold weather grid collapse and cool during a warmer weather grid collapse. And as far as staying warm goes, you have a few different options. You can use a propane space heater like this one, which runs on those 1-pound propane bottles. Then there's also things like kerosene space heaters. And also, if your house has something like a wood-burning stove or fireplace, those are also good ways to stay warm long-term as well. Our ancestors used those as their primary heating method, and it would work just as well today, provided you're smart enough to not burn down your house. So any of these heating methods, make sure that you have a fire extinguisher nearby because stuff does happen. During emergencies, it's not uncommon for house fires to increase in frequency. That actually happened near where I live. Somebody burned down their house trying to thaw out pipes with an electric blanket, which is a really bad idea, but sadly they lost their house because of it. So make sure you have a fire extinguisher and don't do anything risky, because in a long-term grid collapse, chances are help is going to be scarce, so don't really depend too much on the fire department being able to make it to you to help you out. And when it comes to staying cool, I think one of the best ways to go about doing that, at least in a long-term situation, is to rely more on small battery-operated devices that can keep small areas or individual people cool. This particular one is made by Milwaukee. It runs on the same drill batteries that the lanterns use. And then also things like tent fans, whether they run on regular alkaline batteries or rechargeables, those are good as well. But that being said, you're really going to need a way to recharge those devices if you're going to depend on them long term. If you have something like a window AC unit that you keep in storage to plug into a window when you need it, it's important to note that if you're running that on a gas generator, it's only going to last as long as your fuel. And then also, if you're running it on something like a solar power station, that is going to be a power-hungry machine. While some of those solar power stations will be able to run that device, it's going to eat down the battery fairly quickly. You might get a few hours out of it, which is still impressive. It can run it. But you want to kind of pace yourself and make sure that you have that energy when you need it. So relying on rechargeable battery devices, that's not going to really put a dent in your power supply.